wisdom about that. Don't get the idea because you're a hypnosis expert that, in other words, watch out for your ego. Ever remain humble. And he followed those principles himself. So it was, we are always seeking for truth of the human condition. We are not programming or suggesting or manipulating our clients. We are always speaking the truth. Erickson was always speaking the truth. Very often they were unexpected truths, so the clients were continually in a state of arousal and expectation, what the new neuroscientists today call novelty, enrichment, fascination. They were always fascinated by what Erickson was going to say next because it was always a truth. He was never caught in a lie. And yet there was an unusual flavor to his point of view. And it was that unusual flavor that later in my writings, after Erickson passed on, I call this the neuroscience of therapeutic hypnosis, because it was the neuroscientists at that time, around the late 80s, 1990, that were laying down the principles of how novelty and enrichment and exercise was actually turning on gene expression and brain plasticity. And these actual organic changes in the client were the basis of therapeutic hypnosis. It wasn't merely a cognitive behavioral suggestion programming by a powerful personality therapist with a gullible, you might say, patient, weak client. It was always true stuff. So this was the big transition after Erickson passed on in 1980. I went into the deep psychobiology of mind-body rhythm. For example, Erickson saw his clients 2 or 3 hours each session. Well, why? Everyone else was a 45-minute session or 20 minutes. Well, he said it took that about that amount of time, an hour or two, to really get something done. Well, where did he get this idea? Well, it was just intuitive, and sure enough, when I timed my tapes with him and his clients, it was always an hour and a half or two.
Right, so I think that's good, and that's going into going into your stuff. So that piece was good, but that won't be in the Milton stuff. That'll be in your stuff, that bit, because that went in nicely. What else did I think about? Of course, I actually don't know how long you worked with Erickson, but I'm presuming that you worked with him
for 8 years, the last 8 years of his life.
So you would have been there when John Grinder and Richard Bandler came along and stuff. So let me ask you something about that then, because that's of interest to some people. So okay, so you worked with him from 72 to 80?
Yes, that's right.
Great. So you worked with Dr. Erickson from 1972 to 1980, right up until his death. And in that period, of course, the two people synonymous with NLP were seeing Dr. Erickson as well, Richard Bandler and Professor John Grinder.
I never heard of them. I never heard about his work with them. I was very surprised at the first Evolution of Psychotherapy Congress that NLP people were prominent in the audience. I'd really never paid any attention to NLP. So I was a little bit surprised, but of course Erickson worked with a lot of people. Mm-hmm. So I really can't say anything about Binder and Grinder. Actually, I've never met either of them. So I'm just a blank there.
Okay. Okay, so that's fine. people? What else were people interested in? Were there any specific patients that you were there when they were treated that really stand out in your mind?
No, they're all excellent. You have to read the cases, read the books. They all have their unique quality, but there was no one that was better than another. He was always doing an excellent job. True, some patients did manifest classical hypnotic phenomena like amnesia and hallucinatory type responses, but he wasn't pulling for those. They just happened. And that's consistent with modern research in hypnosis that says about 5 or 7% of the population really experiences the deep hypnotic phenomena, the classical phenomena. The rest are what we call ideal sensory, ideal dynamic responses. The ideas that the therapist shares have dynamic physiological responses in the patient's body, and my contribution has been to study what those responses were. And over the past 30, 40 years now, I've traced that body response to ideas down to the molecular genomic level, to the level of RNA and DNA, so that now in the next evolution of psychotherapy Congress that's taking place this December, I'm presenting my new RNA, DNA, psychosocial genomic healing experience. That this is the level at which hypnosis is really operating. It's operating on a cognitive behavioral level, but yes, we've known that for hundreds of years. What's new? The new thing is that there's research that now suggests that how does mind communicate with the body? Mind turns on RNA molecules in neurons of the brain, and these RNA molecules are very sensitive, and it's these RNAs that get communicated to the DNA, the genes that make the proteins that lead to the therapeutic effects. So this is the first time this RNA, DNA, we'll call a hypothesis at this point. There's a lot of mind gene research that I cite that supports this, but for the most part they've been kind of small studies. We now need larger, full-scale studies to validate the entire theory.
Great, so let's hold that because we're going into your current work there again. If you want to save all of that so that you get a good run-up at it, because that's otherwise will wear you out and it's tiring answering these questions. Okay, so that's Eric. Is there anything that you'd like to, apart from the final question on Erickson, which we'll come at right at the end, is there anything else that you think has been missed out, a personal view, if you like, about Milton, something which, misconceptions, things that you'd like to put right, something that people don't know, that's not your epiphany, but just anything that you'd like to tell the world?
You know, I've been so focused on trying to find the answer, the data-based answer to what was behind Erickson's success. I think people think of Erickson as kind of a magic man, a mysterious, what would they call it, the wizard of the desert. I did not see any wizard of the desert. I saw a very canny, brilliant mind, a person who had contracted polio when he was 18, and then another strain of it when he was 52, and he was in a wheelchair all the years that I knew him. How he coped effectively with his handicaps, with great heroism and without complaining, and how he was like the American pioneer, frontiersman. He was a guy who had, yes, a certain inherent power about his personality, but he never displayed it. He never was a showman. He was always very humble and always very truthful and seeking for the truth about a person's nature. And it was this pursuit of the truth, I think, that the clients, his patients, mirror neurons, were picking up from his manner, and that's why they responded so well to him. Well, there was no false persona. So you might see, you get what you see, but it was just straight stuff. I might have distorted some of his work in my early work when I talked about the indirect approach to hypnosis. That's what people were interested in. But if you actually read the books and the dialogues we had, it was indirect, but from one point of view. But from another point of view, it was very direct. It was very truthful, but truth as he was intuiting it. And yes, he was a genius in the way he would pick up truths about a client, pick her up right to the heart of the matter, so that the client knew that you knew what they knew. And it was a very straightforward thing. So today I would not emphasize the indirect, I would emphasize the truth and the courage of exploring the human condition, one person, one session, one moment at a time.
Great.
There's no hidden tricks.
Okay, so now I'll ask you some questions about the relevance to firewalking and where, who knows where this will go, but as you know, I'm interested in the mind-body connection with a view to if people have, in an altered state, make visualizations of them doing things positively within a short period of time, within the period of time of preparation, perhaps 2 or 3 minutes to walking on hot coals. Is there any evidence in your work, and I'll say this more succinctly to camera for the real question, but is there more evidence in your work that suggests that this is possible? So,
the time factor in preparing for a hypnotic intervention, is that what you're saying?
I'm saying that our experience is that people who think good things don't burn. What is the body, what evidence is there in your work that suggests that the body can make changes at a physical? So let me ask it, that's the question, but let me ask it so that the camera, for the camera. So Ernest, in the firewalking community we see that if people prepare themselves mentally, that they think good things, make good pictures,
yes,
go inside, see good things happening,
yes,
that they don't seem to burn their feet. And if people think bad things and make pictures of them burning,
yes,
they seem to get blisters.
yes.
What evidence? Is there evidence?
I see evidence for this in all of my work. In hypnosis, the classical definition of hypnosis today among researchers and clinicians is hypnosis is focused attention and positive expectation. So you're saying that when we get people who come to firewalking, yes, they know they're going to focus their attention, and yes, they have all these positive images. That follows the exact modern definition of what hypnosis is.